The story I'm about to tell happened exactly 6 years ago in May. Every time that day approaches on the calendar, I dread it. Around that date, the memories begin to surface, and they drag me down into a dark place. On the morning of that day, my life was at its peak. By midnight, it had completely fallen apart. I was a defeated man, feeling as though my life was over. Let me explain how it all began between my ex-wife and me. I was in my second to last year of university in Salamanca when I met the woman who, just 15 months later, would become my wife. Sounds like a joke, doesn't it? You meet a woman in college, and 15 months later, you're married. What could possibly go wrong? For the sake of this story, I'll call her Carmen, and you can call me Antonio. Carmen was also in her junior year, and we met while studying in the university library. We had an instant connection, and from the very beginning, I felt something significant was about to happen. We kissed on our second date, but we didn't get to third base until 3 weeks in, and we didn't go all the way for another 5 weeks after that. So yes, I waited nearly 2 months, which is admittedly unusual in modern society. Before we got together, each of us had only been in one previous relationship. Mine was a short but intense affair with a girl when I was 18, while Carmen had been in a serious relationship that lasted for over 5 years. Looking back, that should have been a warning sign. Here was a woman, maybe 21 or 22 years old, who had just come out of a 5 year relationship before meeting me. That's a precarious situation because a man like that likely leaves a permanent mark. Remember that detail for later. In my previous relationship, we were each other's first love. We dated for about 6 months before drifting apart. She was a party girl who loved to drink and smoke, and that just wasn't my lifestyle. As for Carmen, her relationship had been very serious. She and her then boyfriend were on the verge of getting married until she discovered he was cheating on her. Not only that, but the girl he was cheating with had gotten pregnant. He broke up with Carmen to marry his pregnant mistress. I was the first guy she dated after that relationship ended. I suppose you could say I was her rebound. Regardless, we fell deeply in love, and I soon began to imagine a future with her. I wanted to take the next step. So, after only 7 months of dating, I asked Carmen to marry me. She said yes. Of course, it was a massive mistake. My parents were furious when I told them. My father, specifically, said we were far too young and didn't even have jobs yet. He was right on the money. I promised my parents we wouldn't get married until we had both graduated and secured employment. That calmed them down a little, but they still tried to talk me out of it right up until the wedding day. Eventually, they just accepted it was going to happen, against their better judgment. I kept my promise to my parents, and we didn't set a wedding date until we both had jobs. Carmen's parents, on the other hand, were completely supportive of our marriage. They saw me as a great guy, a world apart from the man Carmen had dated before, who, from what I gathered, was something of a bad boy. When it came time to plan the wedding, they paid for everything, including our honeymoon in Majorca. My father was also unhappy with my choice of career. Instead of taking a better paying job in Madrid, where I grew up, I accepted one 200 kilometers away in a rural town near Ávila, Carmen's hometown. The job didn't pay as well, but Carmen had already found a position in her field in Ávila, so I thought it was a fair compromise. My father explained that a man should never compromise when it comes to his vocation. He said it's never a good thing for a man to follow a woman. It should be the other way around. He told me that if a woman truly loves a man, she will follow him to the ends of the earth. I told my father that things were different from when he and my mother were growing up, that women were now seen as equals in their careers. My parents were disappointed, but they accepted that I was an adult making my own decisions. The wedding day arrived, and it was incredible. We were married in the Cathedral of Ávila, where Carmen's family were parishioners, and we had a grand reception afterward with over 180 guests. About 40 were my family and friends. The rest were from Carmen's side. After we returned from our honeymoon, we settled into our new life. Everything was going well. We moved into a new two-bedroom apartment in Avila and spent the next few weeks furnishing and decorating it just the way we wanted. Carmen's job was less than a kilometer from our apartment, and some days she would even walk to work. Mine was about 26 kilometers away, but it was a straight shot that took 30 minutes at most. I didn't mind the drive. In fact, I enjoyed it. It gave me time to decompress before getting home. Since I didn't have any friends in Avila, my world revolved around Carmen, my job, and her family and friends. This was a huge mistake. I was building my entire world around this one woman, which is something a man should never do. Still, it didn't bother me at the time. I was working 60 hours a week and genuinely liked Carmen's family and friends. They were good people, and I have nothing negative to say about them, even today. About once a month, Carmen and her closest friends would get together for dinner to catch up. On those nights, she'd usually be home by 7:30 or 8 o'clock at the latest. Remember that detail. It was their girls' night, but not the wild kind you might imagine. They would just eat and talk. Around the ninth month of our marriage, things were going so well that we decided it was time to start a family. Carmen went off her birth control, and we intensified our efforts, using all the techniques we'd read about to increase our chances of conceiving. A few months passed with no baby, but we were having fun trying. I imagine, reading this, you're thinking my life seemed pretty good. And it was, until that day. It was a Wednesday, and Carmen and three of her friends had planned their monthly get-together at a local restaurant in Avila. They met up after work, and I swung by the restaurant on my way home to say hello and pick up the takeout order Carmen had placed for me. It was a tapas place that made my favorite croquettes and homemade bread. After leaving the restaurant, I went straight home and devoured the food. It was delicious, as always. Shortly after I finished eating, I got a call from Carmen. She said that after dinner, she and her friends were going to one of their houses to talk for a while longer. She asked if that was okay. I told her, of course, and that I'd be waiting up for her. She said she'd be home around 9 o'clock. We said our I love yous and hung up. After the call, I collapsed onto the sofa to relax and turned on the television. I was exhausted from work and full from the meal, so I drifted off to sleep. I only woke up a few hours later, shaken by a strange nightmare. In the dream, Carmen and I were driving on a winding mountain road. Suddenly, she asked me to stop the car. When I did, she got out and walked to the edge of the road. She turned, looked at me with an odd smile, and said, "Goodbye, Antonio." I tried to get out of the car, to run to her, but I was frozen, pinned to the driver's seat. My seatbelt felt like it weighed 500 pounds. When I looked up again, she was gone. I screamed, "No!" And then I woke up. I was lying on the couch, the television still on. I realized it was just a dream, but it left me deeply unsettled. Then I noticed it was past 9:30, and Carmen still wasn't home. I figured their get-together had probably run a little long, but I decided to call her, just to hear her voice and tell her about the crazy dream I'd had. The call went straight to voicemail. I waited 15 minutes and tried again. Voicemail again. I also sent a couple of text messages, but got no reply. That's when I started to worry. Carmen never turned off her phone, and she was never late for anything. Plus, whenever she was out, she would usually send me several texts. That night, I hadn't heard a word from her since she'd called to say she'd be a little late. I decided to call her best friend, who I'll call Lucia. Lucia was a good woman, and I'd become friends with her and her husband. She answered. I told her I was trying to reach Carmen, but couldn't get through. I asked if she knew how much longer they would be. Lucia was silent for a moment, then asked, "What do you mean, how much longer? The girls and I all left the restaurant hours ago." I told her Carmen had called to say they were going to a friend's house. Lucia said that was the first she'd heard of it. She promised to call the other girls from dinner to see if they knew anything and would call me right back. After talking to Lucia, I called Carmen's mother and asked if she was there. She said no and asked why I thought she would be. I explained the situation, and just like me, she began to panic. She called for her husband and handed him the phone. As I explained everything to him, I could hear Carmen's mother in the background, also trying to call her daughter, but it kept going to voicemail. Not knowing what else to do, I told them I was going to get in my car and drive around to see if I could find her. Ávila isn't a very big city, so I thought I had a decent chance. Carmen's father said he and his wife would do the same. First, I drove past the restaurant, but saw nothing. Then I went to the main plaza, where a few bars and restaurants stay open late, but still nothing. As I was driving, I got a call from Lucia. She said she'd spoken to all the girls from dinner, and none of them had seen or heard from Carmen since they left the restaurant. After about 30 minutes of frantic searching, I saw Carmen's car parked on a quiet residential street. I pulled up behind it and immediately called her parents, then Lucia. They all headed to my location. Lucia arrived first. I asked her if she knew anyone who lived on this street. Before she could answer, Carmen's parents turned onto the road and drove past us. I waved them down, and they stopped in front of a house a little further up. They got out of their car and marched straight to the front door. I started walking toward the house when Lucia grabbed my shirt and told me to wait. As I turned to look at her, I heard my in-laws banging on the door, screaming for someone to open it. Lucia had a sad expression on her face. She said she knew who lived there. She paused, then told me it was the home of Carmen's ex-boyfriend, Javier. She said he lived there with his wife and their young daughter. At first, I didn't understand what that meant, but then it hit me like a ton of bricks. Carmen was cheating on me. With him. Lucia and I walked toward the house. When we were about 20 yards away, the porch light flicked on, and I saw a man open the screen door. My father-in-law was yelling at him, trying to force his way inside, with my mother-in-law right behind him, also screaming. They were so loud that a neighbor ran across the street to see what was happening. Then, I saw Carmen step out onto the porch behind the man. Her parents started screaming at her, asking how she could do this. Then Carmen saw me, standing there with Lucia. She cried out my name and started running toward me. I felt like I was on the verge of a complete breakdown. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran. I got in my car and sped away. My adrenaline was pumping so hard, I can't even describe it. I was in total shock. I started driving through the city like a zombie, with no destination in mind, my phone ringing nonstop. After about 10 minutes, I reached the highway on-ramp. I was about to make a U-turn to head home, but instead, I merged onto the highway and just kept driving, hoping to clear my head. Before I knew it, I'd been driving for an hour and was almost 100 kilometers away. I pulled off at a rest stop, planning to use the bathroom and then head back. But as I got back in my car, I made a last-minute decision to keep driving west instead of turning around. I was still an emotional wreck and in no condition to talk to anyone. I ended up driving for another 2 hours until I reached the outskirts of Valladolid. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and I was mentally and physically exhausted. I pulled into a truck stop and fell asleep in my car. I woke up a few hours later to the sound of two truckers walking past my car. For a moment, I forgot where I was and what had happened the night before. Then, it all came rushing back. I went inside the convenience store, used the restroom, and bought a large coffee. When I got back to my car, I checked my phone. As expected, I had dozens of missed calls and text messages from Carmen, her parents, and even Lucia. Instead of calling any of them back, the first thing I did was call my boss. I explained what was happening and asked for a few days off. He was understanding and told me to take all the time I needed. Then I called my parents to tell them what had happened. They were disgusted and deeply worried about me. My father's advice had been blunt. "You need to divorce that woman," he'd said. As you can see, my father doesn't mince words. I should have listened to him from the start, but I didn't. After speaking with my parents, I sent a message to Carmen's father, telling him I had left town for a while, but that I was okay. He replied that he was relieved I was safe and asked me to call when I could. I told him I would, but that it might be a few days, as I simply wasn't in the right state of mind. Then, I went through all the messages Carmen had left. The voicemails and texts confirmed everything. They were a cascade of apologies, each one claiming it was a terrible mistake that would never happen again. The more I listened and read, the more desperate each message became. I won't lie. It gave me a certain twisted satisfaction. In that moment, the woman I had loved more than anyone in the world became someone I despised. And it wasn't a mild dislike. It was a deep, burning hatred. I called my parents again and told them I'd be staying where I was for a few more days. They urged me to come to their house, but I told them I needed to be alone to think things through. I promised to stay in touch and assured them I was fine, that there was no risk of me doing anything foolish. I spent the next 2 days exploring Valladolid and planning my next steps. By the end of the second day, I had made 3 life-altering decisions. First, I was going to divorce Carmen. Second, I would not see or speak to her again if I could help it. And third, I would never set foot in that city again. First things first, I needed to sort out my work situation. I called my boss, laid out my plans, and asked if a transfer was possible. I explained that if it wasn't, I'd have to resign, as I couldn't bear to be anywhere near Ávila, where my wife lived. He was understanding and proposed a solution. He told me the manager of one of our stores in a larger city, Valencia, had just been fired. He said he would love for me to take the position and get the store back on track. Without a moment's hesitation, I said I'd take the job. He told me to hold on, that before I committed, I should visit the place and see it for myself. I agreed. I drove the 3 hours to Valencia and checked into a nearby hotel. That same night, I went to a shopping center and spent several hundred euros on new clothes, including proper shoes, since I had left Ávila on that fateful night with only the clothes on my back. Afterwards, I washed everything at the hotel laundromat. The next morning, I drove out to explore the neighborhood where the store was located. It was a rough area, truly rough. A quick search confirmed my suspicions. The crime statistics were through the roof. After driving around for a bit, I parked in the store's lot and watched the customers coming and going. Then I went inside to get a feel for the place. I noticed the employees were very friendly, but they were in desperate need of training. I went back to my car and thought it all over. Finally, I decided to take the job and called my boss to let him know. We completed the paperwork that same afternoon. 3 days later, I started working at the store. That night, I called my parents to tell them my plans. They were immediately against it. My father suggested I quit and move back to Madrid to look for work there. He argued there were hundreds of openings in the metro area, with better pay and in safer neighborhoods. I told my father I understood his concern, but I wanted to stay with the company and continue working for my boss, who had treated me so well from day one. The following day, I called several lawyers in the county where Carmen lived. I chose one and paid the 1,500 euro retainer with my credit card. I also passed along my wife's contact information. I made it clear that I wanted no further contact with her and that he was to inform her of my intentions. I had noticed her incessant attempts to reach me since I'd left, but I never responded. It was a smart move. As I've said before, cutting off all contact is the best way to handle these situations. My lawyer called her shortly after our conversation and then called me back. He said she was hysterical, that she didn't want a divorce and only wanted to speak to me. He told her he was ending the call, suggested she get legal representation, and informed her that all future communication would have to go through him. He said she just screamed no and hung up. After speaking with the lawyer, I called Carmen's father and explained my decision. I told him I had moved more than 400 kilometers away and was initiating divorce proceedings. He paused, silent for a long moment, before speaking again, his voice thick with emotion. He said he was disappointed and sad, not with me, but with his own daughter. He was ashamed of her. He told me that while he and his wife wished we could have stayed married, he understood I was doing the right thing by divorcing her. It's rare for a girl's father to side with the husband in a situation like this, but he did. And for that, he has my respect. He told me to do what I had to do without worrying and that they would take care of Carmen. Then he asked if I wanted him to arrange for my clothes and furniture to be sent to me. I said no, that I didn't want anything from the apartment. I also offered to pay the last 2 months of rent on the lease, but he told me to forget it, that Carmen would handle it. He said it was the least she could do after what she'd done to me. I thanked him And for the first time since this all began, I broke down. I thanked him for being so good to me, even though I was just some foolish young man who had run off with his daughter. He said I was the best thing that had ever happened to Carmen, and that she was only realizing it now that it was too late. He wished me the best and asked me to keep in touch. That was the last time I spoke to anyone in Carmen's family until I had to return 6 months later for the court hearing. I had hoped I wouldn't have to appear in person, but my lawyer said it was necessary, as Carmen wouldn't voluntarily agree to the divorce terms. Not because she wanted any financial gain, but because she was still holding out hope of winning me back. Even on the morning of the hearing, she left voicemails and text messages begging for a second chance. She had even sent 3 handwritten letters. I never responded to any of her attempts. While I had once felt a deep hatred for her, by the time of the hearing, all I felt was pity. I didn't want to see her or her family before the hearing began, so my lawyer and I walked in with just 5 minutes to spare. Carmen looked at me with tears in her eyes and waved. I just gave her a slight nod. During the hearing, her lawyer told the judge that his client wanted to try couples therapy, that all she wanted was to reconcile and continue the marriage. My lawyer had warned me this might happen. To our surprise, however, the judge said it was quite evident I had no intention of reconciling, given that I had already moved to another city. He looked to my lawyer for confirmation, who replied, "Exactly, Your Honor." He explained to the judge that I had relocated and started a new job, and that we were simply asking to finalize the divorce fairly. Since Spain has at-fault divorce laws, and Carmen had admitted to the infidelity, the hearing was brief. The divorce was finalized. After the hearing, I spoke with Carmen in the presence of my lawyer. She was crying and said she was so sorry, then tried to hug me. Though I didn't want to, I gave her a brief embrace and told her I wished her and her parents the best. Then, I hugged her parents and walked away, and that was it. The marriage, a life that once held so much promise, was over almost as quickly as it had begun. 6 years have passed since that day, and while I'm still single, I've been in a serious relationship with an amazing woman for the last 2 years. Neither of us is keen on the idea of marriage, but we plan to be together forever and want to have children in the near future. We don't even live together yet, but we will when the time is right. As for Carmen, the last I heard, she's living with a divorced man in his 50s who has several adult children. I was told he was a neighbor of hers when they were kids. Apparently, Carmen's parents are not happy with the situation, since she was friends with the man's eldest daughter growing up. Because of this, her relationship with her parents has become even more strained. How do I know all this? Lucia told me. I'm still friends with Lucia and her husband, and we're connected on Facebook. About a year ago, they were in my area, and my girlfriend and I met up with them for dinner. Lucia also told me that Carmen's ex-lover, the one she cheated on me with, is still with his wife, though they apparently both cheat on each other. As the saying goes, once a cheater, always a cheater. She said they were separated for a year, during which time his wife had a baby with another man. And during that same period, he and Carmen dated sporadically. My God. Then, he and his wife reconciled and had another child together. What a dysfunctional group of people. I am so glad I got out when I did, or I would still be trapped in the middle of that disaster.